Book nibbles. Big ideas, small bites. When people first hear the word brainwashing, it often carries the aura of a dark thriller, as if it belongs in a Cold War spy novel or in the desperate confessions of captured soldiers. Kathleen Taylor begins her exploration with that very mystique, pointing out that the term itself has become so loaded with drama and suspicion that we tend to either dismiss it as science fiction or invoke it as an accusation whenever we meet beliefs we dislike. Her project is to rescue the subject from both of those distortions, grounding it instead in neuroscience, psychology, and real world history. She wants to make us see that thought control is neither supernatural nor purely imaginary. It is the systematic use of psychological and social pressures to reshape the mind, and it is both more ordinary and more dangerous than we tend to admit. She starts with the origin of the term. Brainwashing was popularized during the Korean War, when American prisoners of war were subjected to strange and unsettling tactics in captivity. Some confessed to crimes they hadn't committed or appeared to adopt communist ideas. The American public, bewildered and frightened, wanted an explanation. The idea that the communists had discovered new mind control technologies seemed plausible at the time. Later, it became clear that many of these confessions were coerced, some were fabricated, and the actual methods were a mixture of severe duress and psychological pressure rather than exotic new science. Still, the notion stuck. Brainwashing as the theft of a person's free will, a terrifying ability to turn loyal soldiers into pliant puppets. Taylor emphasizes how misleading this framing can be. Brainwashing is not about some magical formula that erases minds like wiping a hard drive. Instead, it is about pushing and reshaping what is already there. Humans are malleable. Our brains are plastic. They adapt constantly to input. Under enough stress, isolation, and repetition, people's belief systems can shift radically. The science of this plasticity is what Taylor carefully unpacks, showing that brainwashing is not an alien intrusion into human life, but an exaggeration of normal learning processes twisted by power. She brings in the idea that the human brain evolved to be social. We survive by copying others, conforming to groups, absorbing shared beliefs. This is efficient most of the time. Children learn language, customs, and moral codes by immersion in their communities. But the same pathways that make education and culture possible can be hijacked by manipulators. Brainwashing, in Taylor's view, is essentially the exploitation of the brain's social learning systems under controlled conditions. To illustrate this, she draws examples from cults. Cults often do not seize people by force, they seduce them. A new recruit may be invited to a meeting or dinner where warmth, friendliness, and community are lavished upon them. The new member feels valued, special, as though they have finally found belonging. Then gradually, the environment shifts. Demands are made. Give up more time, donate money, sever ties with outside friends. Information is restricted. The group begins to define reality for the recruit. What started as voluntary social learning becomes confinement, both psychological and sometimes physical. The person may come to believe things they once would have rejected outright. Here, Taylor shows how the line between persuasion and coercion is not always sharp. It can be gradual, incremental, and cloaked in affection. She also draws on the infamous case of Patty Hearst, the heiress kidnapped by the Symbionese Liberation Army in the 1970s, who later appeared to join her captors in their crimes. The public asked, was she brainwashed or was she complicit? Taylor resists simple answers, explaining that captivity combined with terror, isolation, and the need to survive can shift loyalties and beliefs. What outsiders see as a betrayal or sudden ideological conversion may be, from the inside, an adaptive strategy the brain uses under duress. This naturally leads to her broader argument. Brainwashing is not about erasing choice, but about shaping the conditions under which choices are made. Our decisions are always influenced by environment, peer pressure, authority, and stress. Brainwashing intensifies those influences and removes counterweights. For instance, in cults and in totalitarian states, alternative sources of information are suppressed. This is critical. To control thought, one must control the flow of evidence, the sources of authority, and the channels of conversation. The brain, deprived of alternatives and bombarded with one-sided input, adapts by aligning belief with what is presented. Taylor anchors this in neuroscience by talking about how beliefs are networks of connections in the brain. They are not isolated files, but patterns of associations reinforced by repetition and emotion. When people are subjected to strong emotional experiences, fear, trauma, or intense belonging, those experiences etch themselves deeply into neural pathways. A system that repeatedly rewards certain thoughts and punishes others can gradually rewire what feels true. Brainwashing, then, is a kind of accelerated belief conditioning that works because the brain is always reorganizing itself. She points out that ordinary persuasion uses the same pathways. Advertisers use repetition, emotional cues, and authority figures to shift consumer choices. Political propaganda relies on controlling narratives and amplifying group identity. The difference between these everyday manipulations and extreme brainwashing is one of degree and context, not of kind. This recognition can be uncomfortable because it implies that susceptibility to brainwashing is not a flaw in a few unlucky individuals, but a universal human vulnerability. The book pays careful attention to techniques. Sleep deprivation, for example, weakens rational resistance by impairing the brain's ability to process information critically. Isolation removes the balancing effect of alternative viewpoints. Humiliation and stress undermine a person's sense of self, making them more likely to cling to whatever reassurance is offered by the controlling group. Repetition, slogans, and rituals serve to ingrain new beliefs. None of these methods is mysterious, but together they can be devastating. Taylor gives historical cases, such as the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where citizens were pressured into public confessions and denunciations. The aim was not just to punish, but to remake thought, to force people to rehearse new ideological scripts until those scripts felt real. She draws parallels to Stalinist show trials and to Nazi indoctrination. In each case, the controlling regime used a mix of fear, social pressure, and information management to foster conformity. The lesson is that brainwashing can be scaled up. It is not just something that happens to prisoners in cells, but to whole populations exposed to relentless propaganda. But she is equally interested in resistance. Not everyone succumbs equally. Some prisoners of war never internalize their captors' messages. Some cult members leave despite years of indoctrination. What makes resistance possible? Taylor notes factors such as strong prior identity, skepticism, and above all social support. People who maintain ties to outside networks, even if only in memory, have a stronger anchor. Critical thinking skills also matter. The ability to notice contradictions, to hold onto doubt, can keep the brain from fully reorganizing around imposed beliefs. From a neuroscientific perspective, she explains beliefs are not unchangeable structures. They are dynamic, competing networks. Even under strong pressure, alternative beliefs can linger in the background, waiting for reinforcement. This is why people who leave cults sometimes suddenly snap back to their previous worldview once they are outside the controlled environment. The brain, freed from unrelenting pressure, allows suppressed networks to reassert themselves. Taylor also explores the continuum between brainwashing and ordinary education. Both involve repetition, authority, emotional reinforcement, and community. The difference is that healthy education ideally encourages questioning, exposure to multiple viewpoints, and independent thought. Brainwashing shuts those down. The danger comes when education or religion drifts into indoctrination, when questioning is punished and only obedience is rewarded. She uses the example of religious cults that restrict reading materials and insist that doubt is sinful. The more a system narrows acceptable thought, the closer it slides to brainwashing. She doesn't stop at authoritarian regimes or cults. She turns our gaze to modern democracies and the subtle ways mass media, advertising, and political campaigns exploit the same psychological levers. For example, repeated exposure to slogans or emotionally charged images can shift public attitudes without people realizing it. Social media, with its echo chambers and algorithms that feed us confirming evidence, can mimic the isolating and repetitive features of classic brainwashing environments. Taylor warns that the vulnerabilities exposed in extreme cases are relevant to all of us in daily life. One striking element of her narrative is the emphasis on identity. Brainwashing is not just about installing new ideas, but about reshaping who the person thinks they are. When someone joins a cult, they often take on a new name, new routines, new clothing. These changes are not superficial. They rewire self-perception. Identity is a powerful anchor for belief, so changing the trappings of selfhood helps change the underlying thought patterns. She connects this to neuroscience by explaining how self-related processing is deeply embedded in brain circuits tied to memory and emotion. To change beliefs, manipulators often aim to change the self-concept first. Taylor also emphasizes the role of language. Brainwashing regimes often invent jargon or redefine words. By controlling vocabulary, they control thought. If there is no word for dissent, dissent itself becomes harder to articulate. If ordinary terms are replaced with loaded ones, the emotional framing of concept shifts. George Orwell's Newspeak in 1984 was fictional, but real regimes have tried similar strategies. Language channels thought, so narrowing language narrows mental possibilities. As the narrative continues, Taylor shifts toward the future, considering what neuroscience might offer in terms of understanding and possibly defending against thought control. Brain imaging shows how beliefs activate emotional as well as cognitive circuits. Understanding the neural basis of belief change could, in theory, make us better at spotting manipulation. But she is cautious, noting that the same knowledge could also be used to make more effective brainwashing techniques. The dual-use nature of science means vigilance is required. She also warns against complacency. Many people assume they are immune, that only the weak-willed or uneducated fall prey. History shows otherwise. Intelligent, educated individuals have joined destructive cults or collaborated with authoritarian regimes. The vulnerability is human, not individual. Overconfidence can actually make people more susceptible because they underestimate their need for critical reflection and external reality checks. Taylor's review of deprogramming, efforts to undo brainwashing, shows the challenges. Forceful deprogramming, such as kidnapping cult members and trying to talk them out of beliefs, often backfires. It replicates the coercion of the cult itself. More effective approaches are supportive, patient, and involve reconnecting the person with loved ones and alternative sources of meaning. This again highlights how social support is the strongest antidote to thought control. In reflecting on all this, Taylor emphasizes that the study of brainwashing should make us more humble about the power of environment over the mind. We like to imagine ourselves as autonomous, rational actors. In truth, our brains are deeply interwoven with social inputs. Recognizing this is not disempowering. It is the first step to strengthening resilience. By understanding how easily beliefs can be shaped, we can create healthier environments, schools, families, media that encourage openness rather than manipulation. She closes with an urgent reminder that brainwashing is not a relic of the Cold War. It is alive wherever authoritarian leaders suppress dissent, wherever cult leaders isolate followers, wherever propaganda floods channels unopposed. It is also alive in subtler forms in the persuasive industries around us. The science of thought control is the science of being human. How we learn, conform, and sometimes surrender too much of ourselves to those who claim authority. The best defense is awareness, critical thought, and the cultivation of environments that value truth over conformity. Taken as a whole, Taylor's work is both sobering and empowering. Sobering, because it dismantles the comforting illusion that brainwashing is rare or alien. Empowering, because it shows that the same malleability that allows thought control also allows resistance, recovery, and growth. Human brains are plastic. They can be bent, but also straightened. What matters is the social and informational world we build around ourselves. In the end, the story of brainwashing is the story of influence stretched to its breaking point. From prisoners of war to cult survivors, from propaganda-soaked populations to the everyday consumer bombarded by ads, the same psychological levers are at work. Fear, repetition, isolation, identity, and language shape what we think we know. By bringing neuroscience into the picture, Taylor demystifies the process, stripping it of the aura of magic and revealing the mechanisms. Her book leaves the reader alert, slightly unsettled, but also more equipped to question the forces that seek to steer their minds. And that's it. Brainwashing, The Science of Thought Control by Kathleen Taylor. Thanks for listening to Book Nibbles. If you enjoyed this bite-sized book, don't forget to subscribe for more quick, insightful summaries. See you in the next nibble.